The Galactic Council chambers had never hosted such a peculiar debate. Ambassador Kella of the Vrex Empire adjusted her translucent wings nervously as she watched the holographic display showing Earth's latest diplomatic message around the circular chamber. Representatives from 47 species murmured in their various languages, creating a cacophony that would have driven any human mad within minutes. "They want what?" boomed General Thok, his 4 massive arms gesturing wildly. The Chronari had ruled the Outer Rim for 3 centuries, and his species had never been questioned by anyone until now. Medical supplies, food rations, and safe passage for their refugee ships, Kella repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "The humans claim we violated the Sanctuary Accords when we blockaded the Terran colonies." A collective hiss filled the chamber. The snake-like Seren delegation coiled tighter in their hoverpods, their vertical pupils dilating with what could only be interpreted as amusement. High Counselor Vox, an ancient being whose crystalline form had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen civilizations, pulsed with dim light. "Humans," Vox's voice resonated through the chamber like wind through crystal caves, "have been members of our council for barely 50 standard years. They occupy 12 minor worlds in an insignificant spiral arm. By what authority do they make demands of established powers?" The question hung in the recycled air like a toxic cloud. Earth's human population had reached nearly 15 billion, but their interstellar colonies housed fewer than 2 million souls. They possessed no world crackers, no stellar engineers, no psychic warriors. Their technology lagged centuries behind the major powers. Yet something in their message had made even the most arrogant species pause. Captain Rex Torres, Earth's lone representative, stood slowly from his modest seat in the observer section. His brown hair was streaked with premature gray, and his simple blue uniform looked almost comical next to the elaborate ceremonial garments worn by the other delegates. But his eyes, those distinctly human eyes, held something that made ancient beings uncomfortable. "With respect, High Counselor," Rex said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "we're not making demands, we're offering a choice." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kella felt her wing membranes flutter involuntarily. In her 130 years, she had never heard such quiet confidence from a species so obviously outgunned. "The Sanctuary Accords exist for a reason," Rex continued, taking a step forward. "When the Devourers swept through the Andorian system 3 centuries ago, every species in this chamber signed those accords. We promised all of us that civilian populations would never again be used as weapons of war. Your colonies harbored resistance fighters," General Thok growled, his primary arms crossing over his barrel chest. "Military necessity supersedes civilian protection." Rex's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. Kella had studied human psychology extensively. Her people's survival often depended on reading other species' intentions, and she recognized the subtle signs. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible squaring of his shoulders, the way his hands, previously relaxed at his sides, now rested with fingertips touching his thumbs. "General," Rex said softly, "I fought in the border wars. I've seen what military necessity looks like when it's used to justify targeting children. And I'm here to tell you, with complete certainty, that if you continue this blockade, you will learn why every species in this galaxy whispers the same warning to their young." The chamber fell silent. Even the Saren stopped their subtle hissing. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Rex's next words would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. Don't anger the humans. Because when we decide we've had enough, we don't just fight back. We make sure it never happens again. 3 days after Rex's warning, the first sign appeared in the Kepler Station Trade Hub. The massive orbital platform, which had served as neutral ground for interstellar commerce for over 2 centuries, experienced something unprecedented. Every human trader, mechanic, engineer, and service worker simply vanished overnight. Administrator Yelm, a methodical Quinn whose 6 eyes could process multiple data streams simultaneously, stared at his morning reports with growing confusion. The humans hadn't announced a strike. There were no formal protests, no demands for better working conditions. They had simply ... left. Where did they go? He asked his deputy, a nervous Vrex named PM whose wings twitched with anxiety. Unknown, sir. Their ships departed during the night cycle. They filed proper departure protocols, paid all outstanding fees, and left no forwarding destinations. Yelm's middle pair of eyes focused on the critical systems display. Kepler Station housed nearly 2 million beings from 43 species, but humans had comprised only about 3% of the population. Such a small number shouldn't matter, yet alarms were already beginning to sound throughout the station. Sir, PM's voice cracked with worry. The water reclamation systems are showing cascade failures, and the atmospheric processors in sectors 7 through 12 are operating at 60% efficiency. The realization hit Yelm like a meteor strike. Humans had a peculiar talent for making themselves indispensable in ways that weren't immediately obvious. They gravitated toward jobs that other species found tedious, dangerous, or beneath their dignity. They maintained systems, cleaned filters, crawled through maintenance shafts, and performed the 1,000 small tasks that kept complex installations functioning. Get me a complete audit of all systems, Young ordered, his voice tight with growing panic. I want to know exactly what the humans were responsible for. The answer, when it came 6 hours later, was everything. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on trade stations, mining platforms, agricultural worlds, and research facilities. The humans weren't just leaving, they were taking their institutional knowledge with them. Systems that had run smoothly for decades began failing without the quiet expertise of human maintenance crews. On the industrial world of Vega Prime, the massive fusion reactors that powered the planet's manufacturing sector began operating outside normal parameters. The Chronari supervisors had always considered the human technicians expendable until they discovered that only humans possessed the patience and intuitive understanding necessary to keep the temperamental reactors stable. This is ridiculous, General Thawk declared during an emergency session of the Galactic Council. They're maintenance workers and janitors. How can their absence cause this level of disruption? High Counselor Vox's crystalline form pulsed with frustrated energy. Because humans approach problems differently than other species. They see connections where we see separate systems. They find solutions in chaos where we seek order. Ambassador Keela had spent the past 72 hours coordinating with emergency response teams across Vrex space. Her wings hung limp with exhaustion as she addressed the council. The humans weren't threatening us with military action, she said, her voice hoarse. They were showing us something far more terrifying, how dependent we've become on their willingness to do the jobs we consider beneath us. The great irony wasn't lost on anyone present. For centuries, the established powers had viewed humans as barely civilized newcomers, useful only for manual labor and routine tasks. Yet in 50 years, they had made themselves essential to the daily functioning of galactic civilization. They're not destroying anything, Kala continued. They're not attacking our ships or sabotaging our equipment. They're simply withdrawing their participation. And somehow, that's more effective than any weapon they could have used. The Saren delegation's leader, an ancient serpent named Sisk, uncoiled from her hoverpod. Perhaps we underestimated them. No, came a voice from the chamber's communication array. Rex Torres appeared as a hologram, speaking from an undisclosed location. You understood us perfectly. You just never considered what would happen if we decided to stop being helpful. The human's image flickered slightly, but his words came through clearly. Every species in this council has something they excel at. You Vrex are unmatched pilots. The Krenari build things that last forever. The Saren understand energy manipulation like no one else. But humans, we connect, we adapt. We make things work that shouldn't work. Rex paused, letting his words sink in. And when you decided that civilian lives were acceptable casualties, you forgot the most important thing about humans. We never forget who our friends are. And we never forgive those who hurt the innocent. The cascade effect reached critical mass by the end of the first week. What had begun as a simple withdrawal of human labor had evolved into something the Galactic Council had never anticipated: the systematic collapse of interdependent systems. Across civilized space. Dr. Maya Chunna, human xenobiologist who had been studying on the research station Nova Deep when the Exodus began, found herself in an unusual position. As one of the few humans who remained in Council space, she had become an inadvertent spokesperson for her species' perspective. You have to understand, she explained to the Emergency Council session via quantum link. Humans don't just perform jobs. We form relationships with the work itself. When Tom maintained the atmospheric processors on Kepler Station, he didn't just follow protocols. He learned to recognize the subtle sound changes that indicated potential problems days before diagnostic systems would catch them. The holographic display showed system failures cascading across the galaxy like a slow-motion avalanche. Food distribution networks, dependent on human logistics coordinators who understood the complex cultural dietary requirements of different species, were delivering nutritionally incompatible supplies to wrong destinations. Diplomatic translation. Services which relied on human linguists who specialized in contextual nuance were producing technically accurate but culturally offensive communications. High Counselor, Vox's form had dimmed considerably since the crisis began. Dr. Chun, surely your people realize this withdrawal affects innocent civilians as well. Are humans truly willing to let others suffer for the actions of military commanders? Maya's expression grew somber. Counselor, I've been monitoring human communications networks. Do you know what they're discussing most? The council waited in silence. Evacuation plans. While you've been trying to figure out how to replace them, humans have been organizing massive relief efforts for non-combatant populations affected by the system failures. They're not abandoning innocent beings, they're protecting them from the consequences of your decisions. Ambassador Kella's wings fluttered with surprise. Relief efforts? 300 human cargo vessels are currently en route to stations experiencing life support failures. Another 500 are carrying emergency food supplies to worlds where distribution networks have collapsed. They're not trying to hurt civilians, they're demonstrating the difference between those who cause suffering and those who prevent it. The magnitude of the human response was staggering. In barely 10 days, they had organized humanitarian operations that rivaled the Council's official disaster response capabilities. More impressively, they had done it while maintaining complete radio silence with Council authorities. General Thok's primary arms gestured dismissively. Propaganda. They create the crisis, then position themselves as saviors. General Maya's voice carried a note of steel that made several council members shift uncomfortably. Humans didn't create anything. We simply stopped pretending that the galaxy runs on automatic. For 50 years, my people have been the invisible workforce that kept your civilization comfortable. We fixed what broke, cleaned what was dirty, and solved problems that others couldn't be bothered with. She paused, her image flickering as emotion threatened her composure. But when you decided our colonies were acceptable losses, you revealed something crucial. You never saw us as equals. We were tools. Useful, perhaps. Even valuable, but ultimately replaceable. The truth of her words hit the council like a physical blow. For generations, the major powers had relied on human adaptability and work ethic, while simultaneously viewing them as junior partners in galactic affairs. The humans had accepted this arrangement with characteristic patience until patience ran out. So what do they want? High Counselor Vox asked, his crystal form pulsing with urgent light. Maya smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. They want you to understand something that apparently wasn't clear before. Humans don't make empty threats. When Rex said you would learn why every species whispers warnings about angering humans, he wasn't talking about military retaliation. The council chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. He was talking about this, Maya continued, gesturing toward the displays showing system failures across the galaxy. Humans are patient, adaptable, and incredibly helpful. Right up until we decide you don't deserve our help anymore. Then we become something else entirely. We become a problem you can't solve without us. Ambassador Kella stood alone in her private chambers aboard the Vrex diplomatic vessel, staring at the intelligence reports that had arrived just hours ago. The documents painted a picture that terrified her more than any military threat she had ever encountered. The humans weren't just withdrawing from existing systems. They were building something new. Long-range reconnaissance had detected massive construction projects in previously uncharted regions of human space, orbital shipyards operating at unprecedented scales, asteroid mining operations that dwarfed anything the major powers had attempted. Most unsettling of all, communication networks that seemed to connect every human settlement across the galaxy into a single coordinated entity. They're not isolating themselves, she whispered to her reflection in the viewport. They're consolidating. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. Kella composed herself and activated the communication array. The face that appeared on her screen belonged to Captain Rex Torres, but he looked different now. The quiet resignation from their first meeting had been replaced by something harder, more determined. Ambassador, Rex said without preamble, I'm contacting you directly because intelligence suggests the Vrex Empire is considering independent action regarding the blockade of human colonies. Kella's wing membranes twitched nervously. Captain, I assure you that any military decisions are made by the Council as a whole. 26 Vrex battle groups have moved to forward positions along human space, Rex interrupted. Your Emperor apparently believes that sufficient force can compel us to resume our previous cooperative relationship. The human's choice of words made Kella's skin crawl. Cooperative relationship. As if 50 years of human labor and expertise had been freely given rather than systematically extracted and undervalued. Rex, she said, using his first name for the first time, what are humans planning? For a long moment, Rex was silent. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. We're planning to show the galaxy what humans are really capable of when we stop trying to fit into someone else's civilization and start building our own. The transmission ended, leaving Kella alone with her growing dread. Across the galaxy, similar realizations were dawning on other species. The Saren High Command had discovered that their energy manipulation techniques, which they had considered uniquely sophisticated, were being replicated and improved upon in human research facilities. The Krenari found their unbreakable construction methods being adapted for structures that made their greatest engineering achievements look primitive. Most disturbing of all was the intelligence coming from the Outer Rim territories. Human ships were appearing in systems that had been considered uninhabitable, establishing colonies on worlds that other species had written off as impossible to terraform. They weren't just surviving in these hostile environments, they were thriving. General Thok received the reports with characteristic bluster, but even his 4 arms couldn't gesture away the growing reality. Humans weren't just withdrawing from galactic civilization, they were demonstrating that they didn't need Impossible, he declared during an emergency military briefing. No single species can maintain technological advancement in isolation. They'll stagnate without access to council research and development. His aide, a young Chronari officer named Locke, hesitantly presented the latest intelligence summary. Sir, our analysts believe the humans have been conducting independent research. For decades, they were sharing their discoveries with us, not the other way around. The revelation hit the assembled officers like a plasma blast. For 50 years, the Council had assumed human technological contributions were crude adaptations of superior alien science. The truth was exactly the opposite. Humans had been quietly advancing galactic technology while allowing other species to take credit for the innovations. They made us dependent on them, Thok realized, his voice heavy with dawning comprehension. Not through force or manipulation, but by being so helpful that we stopped thinking about how things actually worked. Meanwhile, in the deepest regions of human space, massive fleets were taking shape. These weren't the crude vessels that humans had used for exploration and trade. These were warships designed with 50 years of accumulated knowledge about galactic threats, built with techniques that combined the best innovations of every species humans had worked alongside. The ships bore names that reflected their creators' intentions: resolution, determination, consequence. They carried no aggressive markings, displayed no threatening symbols. But their very existence sent a clear message to anyone with sensors capable of detecting them. Humanity's patience had limits, and those limits had been reached. The galaxy's oldest rule, "Don't anger the humans," existed for reasons that were about to become very clear. The end came not with the thunder of weapons, but with the quiet hum of a single human transport ship requesting permission to dock at Kepler Station. Administrator Yeln, whose 6 eyes had developed permanent stress marks from 3 weeks of cascading system failures, stared at the communication panel in disbelief. Since the human exodus, his station had been operating on borrowed time. Life support systems functioned at minimal levels. Food distribution was a daily crisis. And the great hub of galactic commerce had been reduced to a struggling shelter for stranded travelers. "Permission granted," he said, his voice barely containing his desperation. The ship that docked was unremarkable, a standard human cargo vessel showing signs of long use. But the woman who disembarked was anything but ordinary. Captain Zoe Park had been one of Kepler Station's most skilled engineers before the withdrawal. Her return drew crowds of desperate administrators and curious onlookers. "Captain Park," Young approached her with carefully controlled urgency. "Have you come to resume your position?" Zoe's smile was polite but distant. "No, Administrator. I'm here to deliver a message from the Terran Assembly." The formal title sent ripples of unease through the gathered crowd. The Terran Assembly was humanity's response to the Galactic Council, a governing body that had formed during the Exodus and now spoke for all human settlements. "The Assembly has reviewed the current situation," Zoe continued, her voice carrying clearly through the docking bay, "and we've reached a decision regarding our relationship with the galactic community." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Around her, beings from dozens of species leaned forward, desperate to hear humanity's judgment. "Effective immediately, all human colonies are withdrawing from the Galactic Council. We will establish independent trade relationships with species that wish to engage with us as equals. We will provide humanitarian aid to civilian populations affected by the current crisis, regardless of their government's policies. And we will defend our territory against any aggression with whatever force is necessary." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, inevitably came the questions. "What about the systems that depend on human maintenance?" called out of Rex. "Traitor, you'll figure it out," Zoe replied simply. "Every species in this galaxy survived for millions of years before humans arrived. You can survive without us again. And if we offer better terms, This from a Chronari diplomatic attaché who had been stranded on the station. If the Council recognizes human colonies as sovereign territories, Zoe's expression hardened. The time for negotiations ended when you decided our civilians were acceptable casualties. We're not interested in returning to a relationship where we do all the work while you make all the decisions. The implications of her words rippled outward like shockwaves. Humanity wasn't just leaving, they were taking their accumulated knowledge, their adaptive capabilities, and their unwavering work ethic with them. The galaxy would continue to function, but it would never again benefit from human ingenuity and dedication. Over the following months, the reality of humanity's decision became clear. The great fleets that had been built in secret didn't launch attacks on Council worlds. Instead, they established a protective perimeter around human space and began the methodical process of creating a completely independent civilization. Humans didn't need the galaxy's approval or permission. They had learned everything they could from other species, adapted those lessons to their own needs, and moved beyond the limitations that the Council had tried to impose on them. The lesson was simple and devastating. Humans were patient teachers, tireless workers, and invaluable allies. But they were also something else that the galaxy's powers had forgotten. They were human. And when pushed beyond their limits, humans didn't break. They evolved. Years later, when young beings across the galaxy asked their elders about the empty sectors where no ships traveled, about the mysterious Terran assembly that had vanished into the void, the answer was always the same whispered warning: don't anger the humans. Because when they decide they're done with you, they don't destroy you. They simply become something you can no longer reach, and the galaxy becomes a smaller, lonelier place without them. The rule had been proven once again, but this time, the lesson came too late to matter. Humanity had moved beyond the need for rules, leaving the galaxy to remember what it had lost and wonder what it might have been if they had chosen differently. In the end, the greatest human characteristic wasn't their resilience, their ingenuity, or their adaptability. It was their ability to walk away from those who didn't deserve them, carrying their gifts to places where they would be truly valued. The galaxy learned to function without humans, but it never learned to forgive itself for making that necessary.